Welcome back to The Fix with me, Karima Brown. And now it's time to look forward to what the news agenda will be this coming week. President Cyril Ramaphosa will be starting Monday, no longer a novice. This week, he hit the 100-day mark. It's one of the stories my panel of journalists is going to unpack. Back here at the table, of course, is Peter Bruce from TISA Black Star, and of course also joining me, Karen Morn from the same stable, and Sam Kokeli from Bloomberg News. Welcome. Thank you so much. Peter, you've written a column this week looking at, of course, the first 100 days, which was marked yesterday.
And Sunday Times,
in today's Sunday Times. And I mean, you basically stipulate and tell us exactly the pace at which the president, has initiated this reforms. You're generally quite generous with him, but do you think that he's doing it quick enough? And more importantly, do you think the public's getting it?
I think the public needs to be educated a little bit. Look, almost everybody wrote the same column in the Sunday papers today, I noticed, which is not surprising, but they started happening on Tuesday. And so I thought, well, if you were writing this thing on Tuesday, by Friday you were already way out of date, because he did a hell of a lot between Tuesday and Friday. But Kaiser Nyatsumba, a former Star deputy editor, I can't remember now, wrote a very nice piece also in the Sunday Times today about how we should just lower our expectations a little bit. There's due process. He can't force things. He can't force the courts to act quickly.
That is such an important thing to actually remember.
People think that Sean Abrams is still running the NPA. They forget, and we forget, that there's a court judgment coming down on whether he was properly appointed in the first place. So let's wait for that. It's irritating to have to wait and all that sort of thing. But given that he's constrained by civility in a way, Ramaphosa is sprinting. It's quite extraordinary what he's got through, and you listen to the Minister of Public Enterprise. I mean, I have to say I was a bit alarmed to hear him talk about even thinking about starting new state-owned companies, but that's another subject for another time. But the object was simply to say Ramaphosa has got a lot already done. The land thing is going to be tricky for him. And he needs to find a way, I was suggesting in the article, to turn it into an economic and political opportunity rather than a cynical thing to frighten people.
A lot of people are saying that it is probably going to be one of the things that's going to be defining the Cyril Ramaphosa presidency, the way in which the land question is going to be handled by him. There's quite a sophisticated view that's coming out of the African National Congress with a whole lot of really interesting things. Everyone was talking about a potential change of the constitution, but we're now hearing about a redistribution bill. We're talking also about the use of land in urban areas. 60% of our people live in urban areas, a point, of course, you make in the column.
If you look at Oosterplaat Air Force Base in Cape Town, I mean, it's completely empty. There's nothing there.
Absolutely. Which brings me, of course, to the issues that you are involved in, Karen, because we are also looking ahead. So Peter is saying, whilst we must be patient with law enforcement agencies because those things take time, one of the things that's definitely going to be setting the agenda this week, of course, is the do-or-die case of the NPA, the Asset Forfeiture Unit, tomorrow in, involving the Gupta assets. Take us through what's at stake for them.
It's a very high-stakes court case. Remember, of course, that the Asset Forfeiture Unit previously bought a preservation order under the Prevention of Organised Crime Act to freeze assets that they described as the proceeds of crime or the instrumentality of an offence linked to the so-called Estina scam. They bought a reconsideration application in which they were successful in unfreezing 180 million of those assets. Judge Forshir Jordan saying that though certain of the transactions involved could be regarded as suspicious, there simply wasn't the evidence to show that concretely they would be shown to be proceeds of crime or the instrumentality of an offence. What had happened in that case, which was incredibly unfortunate, was that it appeared that the AFU had confused a Bank of Baroda clearing account for which was serving 750 clients with the actual Estina account itself. So made certain assertions, for example, that Atul Gupta had directly received 10 million rand from Estina that at that level of evidence couldn't be sustained, because Bank of Baroda then came around and said, but this is not the case. Estina is not giving these people money. The asset forfeiture unit then brings a second application under POCA, and this is really what the court is deciding tomorrow, in which they're saying we want these assets restrained, 250 million of them, because we want, post the conviction of the people that have been charged over Estina, which of course include Varun Gupta, a Gupta nephew, a number of individuals linked to Oak Bay, etc. After that happens, we're going to bring a process for confiscation of assets, and we want to preserve those assets or restrain them so that they can't be sold. You can't do anything pending the finalization of the criminal trial.
If we cut through all the detail, does the asset forfeiture unit have a case?
Well, that's what the court has to decide tomorrow. And it's bigger than that. It's about the court saying, because the Guptas are saying, you're never going to convict us. You don't have the evidence. Your evidence is unsubstantiated. You misconstrue bank records, etc., etc., etc. So this case isn't just about the unfreezing of these assets. It's essentially asking, as the Guptas have asked the court to do, make a determination about the prospects of success on conviction.
Well, talking about success of conviction, I mean, we are, of course, also reminded of former President Jacob Zuma's legal woes, which is, how long is a piece of string? The big thing, of course, is he's running out of money. We've already seen him drop the review case because there was a challenge on, getting Hali to cough up the money themselves. Do you think that we're going to see in the next few weeks, Karen, President Zuma perhaps applying for legal aid and not being represented by senior counsel, considering the fact that Cyril Ramaphosa is playing it so tightly? He's basically being guided by the law on this.
He hasn't. What's so interesting is that the Minister of Justice, all the other parties have filed notices to abide, that big court case which is now going to be consolidated, DA, EFF, over the funding of Jacob Zuma's legal fees. Ramaphosa, the President, has yet to indicate what his attitude is. All the other government people involved have said, we're abiding, we're not getting involved in this ring. And we're all going to be watching to see what does he say. If he files a notice to abide, former President Zuma has to go in there at his own personal cost, for which we don't know where he's going to get the money, and literally fight for his fees. His lawyer, Hali, says he will go to court in June and he will say to the court, please, we can't, this case cannot continue in November. I need to be able to fight for my fees. This is a constitutional issue, potentially go all the way to the Constitutional Court, but you can't make my case, my prosecution go ahead. And what will be pivotal, of course, is what does the National Prosecuting Authority say? This is an organization that the President, former President, has repeatedly accused of delaying his prosecution. And that was one of the main bases for which he repeatedly told the court that this was unfair.
Yeah.
He's now in a circumstance where I would argue that he has almost zero chance of convincing a court that he is legally entitled to legal funding. I don't think the State Attorney's Act applies to him, and I think he will fail in that case. What does the state then do if he turns around and says, I need a year, 2 years, 3 years in order to make this application, which I believe ventilates my legal rights? Must my trial then go on hold while I make that case? Or, as you said, does he then go and say, well, I must get legal aid, given that he's probably going to fail the means test to get legal aid?
Obviously, we can talk about this forever, but let me bring in you, Sam. Peter's outlined this, the blistering speed at which the president is running. Karen is talking about the complications of legal processes that looks at whether people are actually brought to justice. Do you think that rating agencies place enough, time and energy on looking at that when they make the decision? And the reason, of course, that I'm asking this is on Friday midnight, S&P just, refused to change our status, despite the kind of things that Peter's been outlining, and of course the lengthy processes that court judgments and legal suits just take. What do you think the rating agencies are thinking of that we haven't done yet?
Look, I think there are more than one way to look at the decision by S&P on Friday. That they didn't push us further down this deep, dark hole of junker status could be seen as a good thing. If you look at the countries that have slid down the path, you find that it takes 5 to 7 years to get out of junk. And normally you get the one round that shocks everyone, you go into junk, and then you get secondary downgrades. And South Africa hasn't been downgraded now, and I think it's a good thing that it hasn't happened. It should be seen as a positive for the number of things that have taken place in South Africa. We had a budget that was seen at the beginning of the year as a very credible budget, despite the problems that are there for the domestic market, the VAT politics being one of them. But the ratings agencies tend to have a different view to your voter would be worried about VAT, for example. But there have been a number of things that Peter mentions, this blistering speed that we've seen. A number of decisions that I've seen being positive about ratings agencies, about the management of the SOEs, but there are still questions around their finances. So there's been a few good decisions that have come out of the Ramaphosa government. Even local business has welcomed the decision by S&P on Friday. But also, if you check how South Africa ended up being junked, it didn't happen overnight. We saw what happened with the Pravin Gordhan removal. We got junked. But we started losing our status around 2009. And there were two big events around 2009, the global recession in South Africa with Jacob Zuma presidency coming through. And it took public debt from 26% of GDP to around about 52% in no time. So we started losing that status slowly. Around about 2012, you and I were writing about Fitch and S&P warning South Africa about fiscal U-turns, about policy uncertainty. So that cascades, but it shocks people when it happens. So getting out of it is going to take a while.
And of course, Peter, you were raising that big question about kind of, it's one thing rescuing, it's another kind of making
well, I
these
mean, what you have to get used to is the rating agent. This was S&P, so I think we're stable at S&P, or we...
All three are seeing...
Okay, so we're junk but stable junk. You can be junk but negative junk, and that's bad. You can be junk but positive junk, so the next step is up. So stable junk is not bad after, you know, the first after the first hit. And if the government continues to sort of put its nose to the grindstone, we'll get to junk maybe positive, you know, by the end of the year, and that'll be a good thing.
Well, one of the things that I quickly want to talk to you about before we go to our last big issue is the front page of the City Press, Peter. The DA split looms. I mean, is that even real? Where can the DA go? I mean, if the DA's racial ceiling has to be broken through to get the kind of volumes to even envisage becoming a government one day, can this actually happen? Who's behind this? Does the story have credibility?
As far as I understand it, and there's no secret about it in the story, I mean, there's Franz Cronje, who runs the Institute of Race Relations, is part of the liberal establishment in this country. The IRR is part of the liberal establishment, and he has been canvassing opinion about whether to start a small liberal party, which would do, he thinks, to the DA, which he sees as drifting to the sort of left into social democracy, what the EFF is supposed to be doing to the ANC, which is drawing it as a sort of splinter back towards the Freedom Charter. Whether it's a good idea or not, I have no idea. I mean, I'm glad I'm not Musi Maimane, because you don't want that happening on your doorstep. But those conversations have happened. Whether they've gone anywhere, I've absolutely no idea.
Look, I mean, South Africa is obviously becoming really, really interesting. We are about 16 months away from a general election, and it's going to be really interesting to see how things are going to pan out. But one man, of course, whose future remains undecided, and of course that National Executive Committee meeting this week of the governing African National Congress still sitting, is of course Supremo Mapelo. He's resigned. He's 49 years old for early retirement, Sam. But the big thing is, will he remain the boss of the ANC in the Northwest? What's your gut?
Look, the writing is on the wall. You know, you've seen this thing building up, and there's the premier, and you can see the whole Ramaphosa machinery walking into the ANC, moving slowly at times. Sometimes it surprises you when it picks up a speed. You think that eventually the politics will move in a way that the PEC has to change. They can't coexist. You can't have the new dawn and this great change and then have somebody who represents the opposite of that.
Well, colleagues, thank you so very much. Of course, that is Sam Mkokeli and, of course, Karen Moore, and on my my right, my sparring partner, Peter Bruce. Thanks so very much, everyone. Now that you're ready for the week ahead, time to step away from the politics and lighten things up. He swapped the office for the kitchen. Chef Lenswe Bengu is here next to teach us how to follow our passions.